At SpaceX headquarters, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a stark glow over the otherwise empty offices. The digital clock on the wall blinked 9:12 p.m., but inside conference room, time seemed to have frozen. Elon Musk stood at the head of the long, polished table, his normally unshakable posture now faltering. The man who had built rockets that defied the laws of physics, who had turned the impossible into inevitable, was visibly drained. His usually sharp eyes were clouded with doubt, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over a glass of water. He seemed a mere shadow of the visionary who had once declared that humanity would reach Mars. Around the table, his core team of trusted engineers, directors, and advisors sat in stunned silence, their faces etched with concern. They had seen Elon tired before. He was notorious for working at a pace that would have broken most people. But this was different. This was something they had never witnessed. At the far end of the table, Rachel Donovan, the youngest member of the team, tried to focus. As the lead engineer for life support systems, she was the one tasked with ensuring that future Mars colonists would survive the harsh conditions of the Red Planet. She had dedicated years of her life to SpaceX's mission, yet now she couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was lurking beneath the surface. Rachel watched Elon intently, her mind racing. He was a man known for his confidence and relentless drive. To see him so defeated felt like watching a hero unravel before her eyes. She'd worked alongside him for 4 years, seen him excited, determined, and even playful, but never like this. This was the first time she had seen Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, question everything. His voice, normally full of energy and conviction, was now low and strained as he finally spoke. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he said, barely above a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating the room. The room was still, a tension so thick that even the buzzing of the lights felt like a loud disturbance. No one spoke, no one moved. They were all too stunned to respond. Rachel's chest tightened. Her mind began to race through possibilities. What could have caused this? What had shaken him so profoundly? She had known Elon to endure immense pressure before, but now something felt dangerously off. The Mars mission, which they had all worked on for years, was now shrouded in uncertainty. The stakes had never been higher, but something was wrong, something beyond just the technical failures they were encountering. Trick Davis, the flight director, leaned forward in his seat, his face betraying none of the worry he must have felt. He had overseen the success of countless missions, and his calm voice had always been a source of stability during crises. Now, his usual confidence seemed more like a fragile veneer, as if even he didn't know how to navigate the storm they were facing. "Elon," Trick said carefully, his voice measured, "we've faced bigger problems than this before. We've always found a way to make it work. We can still do this." But Elon shook his head slowly, his face grim. "It's not just the technical issues, Trick. It's everything. The pressure from the board, the government contracts, the investors telling me this can't be done. It's all too much." At the other end of the table, Zara Chun, the head of communications, remained silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had crafted SpaceX's public image through triumphs and failures. But this was different. This wasn't just about controlling the narrative, it was about survival. She looked at her tablet, her fingers hovering over it, already thinking about how to message a delay, a crisis, if it came to that. "Tar's right," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with the stress of the situation. "We've been through tighter spots before, Elon. We'll get through this. We just need a little more time." Elon rubbed his temples, his gaze distant. "I don't know if there is enough time left," he murmured. Rachel's mind kept circling back to the same point. If Elon Musk, the man who made the impossible seem inevitable, was about to break, what did that mean for all of them? Beside him, Dr. Sanjay Patel, the chief medical officer for the Mars mission, shifted uneasily in his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly as he read the expression on Elon's face. He had been part of the Mars team from the very beginning and had never seen Elon like this before. The weight of the mission was clearly taking its toll. He couldn't help but wonder if the problems they were facing were only the tip of the iceberg. "We're 6 weeks from launch," Elon continued, his voice almost a whisper now. The life support systems, the propulsion issues, they're all pushing us to the edge. Our margins for success are too narrow. Trick cleared his throat, looking at the rest of the team before turning his attention back to Elon. We've overcome worse problems in less time. We can do this. But Elon didn't seem convinced. His shoulders slumped, his eyes lost in thought as he stared down at the papers in front of him. It was clear that the weight of the situation was more than just technical. There was something more at play, something far more insidious. Rachel's eyes flickered to the tablet in front of her, her fingers automatically starting to tap against the screen as she reviewed the latest life support simulations. She couldn't focus. She had spent years perfecting these systems, but now, with Elon on the brink of giving up, she felt a creeping dread settling in her chest. What if the mission fails? What if everything they've worked for crumbles? Suddenly, the tension in the room was broken by the soft buzz of Elon's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression changing in an instant. The fatigue vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden intensity. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice now more commanding, more urgent. "I need to take this." He stepped out of the room, leaving the team in stunned silence. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment, no one spoke. Rachel felt her heart pounding in her chest. What had just happened? How could one phone call change Elon's demeanor so drastically? Trick was the first to break the silence. "Do you think this is some kind of breakthrough? Maybe from the propulsion team?" Zara glanced up from her tablet, her expression sharp. "Possibly, but we can't afford to speculate too much right now." Minutes ticked by, each one heavy with unanswered questions. The room seemed to hold its breath as they waited for Elon's return. Rachel found herself lost in thought, wondering what had caused the sudden shift in him. Had it been a breakthrough? A new direction? Or was there something darker behind scenes? When Elon returned, it was as though the storm had passed. His usual intensity had returned. His eyes were bright, and his posture was straight, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. "We're adjourned for the night," he said quickly, gathering his papers. "We'll reconvene tomorrow at 8 a.m. I need each of you to review your department's readiness reports before then." No one spoke. They watched as Elon moved toward the door, his footsteps brisk and confident. He was back to his usual self, but the tension in the room lingered like a shadow. Rachel felt her pulse quicken as she stared at the empty doorway. What had just happened? What had Elon learned that had changed him so suddenly? Trick's voice cut through her thoughts. "That was weird," he said quietly. "Very weird," Zara added, still processing everything that had transpired. As the team filed out of the room, Rachel's mind continued to race. She couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. Elon's sudden shift, his odd behavior, none of it made sense. But what was the real story behind scenes? Rachel had spent her life working toward this mission, but now, for the first time, she was beginning to wonder if the cost of success was too high. The next morning, the SpaceX headquarters was buzzing with activity, but the atmosphere in the conference room remained heavy. The early sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows over the table where Elon Musk and his core team gathered once again. The previous night's tension still lingered in the air like a thick fog, and no one was eager to address it. The usual chatter that accompanied these early meetings was absent. The team sat in silence, their minds racing with unspoken thoughts, trying to make sense of what had transpired. Elon was seated at the head of the table, his posture as unyielding as ever. The glint of determination had returned to his eyes, but Rachel could still sense the undercurrent of something darker, something that had not been addressed. The previous evening, Elon had seemed like a man at the brink of collapse, yet today he appeared reinvigorated. His shoulders were squared, his voice was firm, and his energy was palpable. But to Rachel, this sudden shift seemed too sharp, too immediate. She wasn't convinced that whatever had happened in that phone call had solved their problems. The Mars mission was still in peril. The weight of the unknown was heavier than ever. "All right," Elon began, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We need to focus. We are 6 weeks from launch, and there is no room for error. We've got to find solutions to the problems with the propulsion system, life support, and environmental controls. We are going to have to work harder than ever before." Rachel listened intently, but she couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at her. There was something Elon wasn't saying. His words were confident, even inspiring, but his eyes, the way they flickered to the door, the tightness around his jaw, told her a different story. He was still carrying the weight of something far larger than the Mars mission itself. Trick Davis, who had been the most level-headed member of the team during their previous meeting, now seemed unusually distracted. He kept glancing at the door as if he were expecting someone or something. Trick had guided countless missions through crises, and his calm, calculated nature was one of the reasons SpaceX had come this far. But today, he was jittery. Every so often, his gaze flickered nervously to Elon, but he remained silent. Elon continued outlining the mission's technical failures, but Rachel noticed that his usual meticulous attention to detail was missing. He rushed through certain areas, glossing over critical points. It was as if he were avoiding something, perhaps even avoiding acknowledging the full scope of the problem they were facing. The meeting proceeded, and Elon moved on to discussing the propulsion issues. Rachel could feel her mind drifting, a mix of concern for the mission and a growing suspicion that something far more sinister was unfolding behind the scenes. She couldn't shake the thought of the previous night, the way Elon had looked when he said, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Her thoughts were interrupted when Zara Chun, the head of communications, spoke up. "Elon," Zara said, her voice steady but filled with underlying urgency, "we need to start preparing for the inevitable delays. The investors are already breathing down our necks. We have to have a message ready in case we need more time." Elon nodded without hesitation. "I understand, but no delays. We need to stay on schedule." Zara's brows furrowed, and Rachel could see the slight twitch in her fingers as she typed out a message on her tablet. There was a subtle tension between them, a silent exchange that Rachel couldn't quite decipher. Zara, as always, was the master of the public narrative, but Rachel couldn't help but wonder how much of what they were seeing today was merely a performance. As the meeting dragged on, Rachel's mind kept returning to the previous night's encounter. The strange phone call, Elon's sudden change, the cryptic warning she had received from the anonymous message. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening beneath the surface, something that none of them fully understood yet. Finally, the meeting broke up. Everyone shuffled out of the conference room, returning to their respective departments. But Rachel didn't feel like leaving. She stayed seated, staring at the papers in front of her. The technical issues with life support were real. The simulations were showing stress fractures, and there were multiple failure points that needed immediate attention. But there was something deeper at play here, something that had nothing to do with propulsion or life support. She needed answers. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Without thinking, she grabbed her tablet and headed for the engineering wing. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't need to. She knew that if she wanted to uncover the truth, she'd have to work alone for a while. The building was eerily quiet. Most of the engineers had already gone home for the night, leaving behind a few die-hard team members who were still working on last-minute adjustments to the mission. As Rachel moved through the hallways, she felt the tension in the air, thick as a storm cloud. She passed empty conference rooms, dimly lit offices, and closed doors that led to the various departments. But it wasn't the silence that made her uneasy, it was the feeling of being watched. Rachel paused outside the restricted R&D lab. She wasn't supposed to be here. The R&D section was off-limits to most employees. But her instincts were telling her that something wasn't right. Something big was going on behind those closed doors. As she drew closer, she heard voices. Faint, but unmistakable. Elon's voice. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. What was he doing here? He had looked so exhausted in the meeting, but now he was speaking with a calm intensity that Rachel hadn't seen before. She crept closer, her footsteps light on the polished floor, and pressed her ear to the door. "You're asking the impossible, Gray," Elon's voice said, strained but firm. "We don't have the time for this. People are going to get hurt." The response came from a voice Rachel didn't recognize. A cold, clinical tone. "Nothing is impossible for you, Mr. Musk," the man said. "That's why we need this to happen." Rachel froze. She had heard the name before, Gray, but who was he? What was he asking of Elon? The mention of hurt and the urgency in Elon's voice sent a chill down her spine. She couldn't hear much more, but it was enough. She stepped back from the door, her thoughts racing. This was far worse than she had imagined. The mission wasn't just in jeopardy because of technical issues. There was something else, something far more dangerous. Rachel's mind returned to the anonymous warning message she had received just hours ago. Trust no one at SpaceX, not even Musk. Elon was hiding something, and it was up to her to find out what it was. The corridors of SpaceX seemed quieter than usual as Rachel Donovan made her way toward the restricted R&D lab. The hum of fluorescent lights above her echoed in the otherwise still hallway. As she approached the lab, her pulse quickened. She had overheard enough of the conversation to know that something was terribly wrong. Elon Musk, the man who had built SpaceX from the ground up, was speaking to someone named Gray about issues that seemed much larger than just technical failures. The stakes were beyond anything they had prepared for. She paused just outside the lab door, her heart hammering in her chest. What was going on behind closed doors? She had been part of SpaceX for too long to ignore her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that something sinister was afoot. She needed answers, and she was determined to find them, whatever the cost. Rachel stood there for a few moments, her mind racing. The more she thought about what she had heard, the more it made sense. There had been strange occurrences over the past few weeks. Missing data, unexplained delays, and most concerning of all, Elon's behavior. He had always been a man of action, someone who thrived under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't just about a few technical issues. This was about something far more dangerous. With a deep breath, Rachel decided to act. She needed to get into that lab. She had no idea what she would find, but she couldn't just sit back and let things unfold without understanding the full picture. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one was watching, before slipping into the shadows and making her way toward the security panel. She had worked on security protocols for the Mars mission before. Nothing too advanced, but enough to give her a working knowledge of the system. The R&D lab was heavily secured, but there was one flaw that only a few people knew about. A back door that had been left intentionally open for certain high-level staff members, a shortcut to bypass some of the more tedious security measures. Rachel took a deep breath and began typing the override code into the security panel. It took only a few moments before the system beeped in response. The door clicked open. She slipped inside, her heart racing in her chest as she moved cautiously through the darkened lab. The R&D lab was a massive room, filled with rows of workstations, prototype parts, and the hum of computers. The dim glow of screens cast an eerie light across the vast space, but Rachel barely noticed the details. She was too focused on finding the answers she desperately needed. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a small conference area near the back. Elon and the mysterious Gray were seated at the table, still deep in conversation. Rachel moved closer, careful to avoid making any noise. She was close enough now to hear their words clearly. Elon was speaking again, his voice tight with frustration. "This is insane. You're asking me to build a weaponized Mars habitat. That's not what this mission is about. It was never about that." Gray's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "It's not about what the mission was meant to be, Mr. Musk. It's about what it can become. This is a matter of survival. Control of Mars means control over Earth's future." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. The Mars mission, a mission that had been conceived to secure humanity's future in space, was being hijacked for something much darker. They were talking about turning the very systems designed to sustain life on Mars into a weapon capable of threatening Earth. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone want to do that? She moved closer, trying to gather as much information as she could without being detected. Gray leaned forward, his voice becoming more insistent. "We need to move quickly. We're on a tight timeline. You've agreed to this, Elon. We need to stay on track." Elon didn't respond immediately. Rachel could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands were clenched tightly on the table. He was fighting something, either his own conscience or the pressure that Gray was putting on him. But what was Gray's real agenda? Who was he working for? Rachel's mind raced with possibilities, but she knew she had to get more concrete evidence. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice quieter but still resolute. "This is wrong, Gray. I can't just go along with this. You're asking me to sacrifice everything. My principles, my company, my team. I won't do it." Gray's expression didn't change. "You've already agreed, Mr. Musk. It's too late to back out now." His eyes shifted slightly, landing on a tablet on the table. "We've got everything in place. We need you to make the necessary modifications. Otherwise, there will be consequences." Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she realized what Gray was implying. The consequences were not just for Elon Musk, they were for everyone at SpaceX. Rachel thought back to the warning she had received the night before. Trust no one at SpaceX, not even Musk. That message was starting to make sense now. There was something far deeper going on within the company. Something far more dangerous than a simple technical problem. As Gray spoke again, Rachel's mind raced. She needed to get out of there and figure out her next move. She couldn't let herself be discovered. The lab door was still open behind her, and she was about to leave when a sharp sound, a metallic clang, made her freeze. She had accidentally bumped into a stack of metal parts. The conversation inside the lab stopped instantly. Elon's voice, laced with concern, called out, "Who's there?" Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away slowly, her eyes scanning for an escape. She wasn't sure how much they had heard, but she didn't want to risk it. She had to leave, and quickly. Before she could retreat any further, the door to the lab opened, and Elon stepped out, his face drawn tight with stress. He didn't see Rachel. She had already slipped into the shadows, but he had clearly sensed something was wrong. As he turned to look toward the lab entrance, Rachel realized she had been seen. She had to leave before he put the pieces together. She backed away as silently as she could, careful not to alert anyone, until she reached the security panel. Her hands were shaking as she punched in the override code to close the door. The latch clicked into place just as she turned and ran down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Rachel reached the main lobby and slowed to a walk, trying to catch her breath. The weight of what she had just overheard hung heavily on her shoulders. Elon Musk, the man who had once promised to take humanity to Mars, was being blackmailed. His life's work, SpaceX's mission, was being manipulated by forces she didn't fully understand. She needed help, but who could she trust? Zara? Trick? Everyone seemed to be operating under the same cloud of uncertainty, and Rachel wasn't sure where to turn next. What she didn't know was this: whatever was happening at SpaceX wasn't just about rockets and Mars. It was about power, control over humanity's future, and she was caught right in the middle of it. Rachel couldn't shake the image of Gray's cold, calculating eyes from her mind as she made her way back to her car. The conversation she had overheard in the lab replayed over and over in her head. The implications of what she had heard about the Mars mission being turned into a weapons platform were both terrifying and perplexing. How could Elon Musk, someone who had dedicated his life to advancing humanity's future, agree to such a plan? She was still in a daze as she drove through the nearly empty streets of Hawthorne. The night air felt cool against her skin, but it did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. The warning she had received about not trusting anyone at SpaceX suddenly felt all too real. If Gray had the power to manipulate the mission and force Elon to cooperate, how deep did this conspiracy go? And who could she trust to help her unravel it? As she pulled into her modest apartment complex, Rachel felt a pang of isolation. Most of her colleagues lived in upscale neighborhoods near the coast or downtown Los Angeles, enjoying the luxuries that came with working for a company like SpaceX. But Rachel had always preferred being closer to headquarters, just a short drive away in case she had a breakthrough or needed to test something immediately. Still, tonight, she wished for a longer drive, more time to process everything she had learned. She parked her car in her usual spot and sat there for a moment, staring out at the quiet parking lot. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from Zara-chun. You okay? Rachel hesitated before responding. It wasn't like Zara to check in on her outside of work, but then again, it wasn't like anyone was acting like themselves these days. She typed back quickly, just confused. Never seen Elon like this. Seconds later, Zara's reply popped up. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. We'll figure it out. Rachel let out a long breath, trying to calm herself. She had to get some rest, but she couldn't stop thinking about everything she had discovered. The stakes had never been higher, and the very future of their mission was hanging in the balance. What if they don't stop this? She thought. What if Gray gets what he wants? She climbed out of her car and walked up the stairs to her apartment. Her small one-bedroom was sparsely furnished. Just a couple of chairs, a desk piled with engineering books and notepads, and a few personal items scattered about. The only decoration was a photo of her and her younger brother, Finn, from his college graduation. It had been taken just a couple of years ago, before the car accident that claimed their parents. Finn had been her rock since then, and she had been his. They were all each other had left. Rachel kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The Mars mission had always been more than just a job for her. It was the culmination of everything she had worked toward, everything she had believed in. To be part of something so important, to help humanity become a multi-planetary species, had been her dream. But now, that dream was tainted. The mission wasn't about colonization anymore. It was about weaponization, and her brother, Finn, was somehow tied to it. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was a video call from Finn. Her stomach churned. Finn had always been there for her, and lately, she'd been leaning on him more than usual. But tonight, she didn't know how to talk to him. She had so many questions, but she couldn't ask him anything without risking everything. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the decline button, but she knew that ignoring him would only prompt more questions. Reluctantly, she accepted the call. Finn's face appeared on the screen, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. He was still the same, his dark curly hair, his warm brown eyes, the same mischievous grin that had always made her feel at ease. But now, something felt different. He seemed guarded. "Hey, space girl," Finn said with his usual teasing tone. "You look terrible." Rachel forced a smile, trying to push aside the unease that had settled in her chest. "Thanks," she replied. "Just a long day." Finn's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "What's going on?" "Mars mission problems." Rachel hesitated, her thoughts racing. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to explain what she had discovered about Gray, about the weaponization of Mars. But she knew it wasn't safe. If Finn was involved in this in any way, she couldn't risk exposing him. "Not yet." "Something like that," she said carefully. "Just complicated." Finn's expression softened. "I know how it is. You live for complicated problems." He smiled, but there was a glint of concern in his eyes that Rachel couldn't ignore. "Yeah," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I guess I do." Finn brightened then, changing the subject. "Good news, though. I got that internship I applied for. The government one." Rachel blinked, momentarily distracted from her worries. "That's amazing, Finn. I'm so proud of you." He smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I start next month, moving to D.C. It's been a long time coming." She couldn't help but feel a pang of pride. Finn had grown up so much since their parents' death. He had turned into a brilliant, capable young man, and now he was about to take on a new chapter in his life. She only wished she could be as certain about the path she was on. "I'll miss you," she said, her voice quiet. Finn shrugged. "I'll miss you too, but we'll stay in touch. I'll be fine. It's a great opportunity." They chatted for a few more minutes, but Rachel's mind kept returning to the nagging feeling in her gut. What if Finn is involved in all of this somehow? She had to know, but she couldn't risk asking him too many questions. The more she pushed, the more suspicious he would get. And if he were involved in something dangerous, she couldn't put him at risk. When they ended the call, Rachel felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't been entirely honest with Finn, but she didn't know how to tell him the truth without putting him in danger. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Zara. "Meeting in 30 minutes. Be there." Rachel sighed, rubbing her eyes. She was tired, exhausted really, but there was no time to rest. Whatever was happening at SpaceX, she was in it now. She had to see it through. She stood up and grabbed her bag. As she walked toward the door, she glanced once more at the photo of her and Finn on the desk. We're in this together, she thought. And whatever happens, I'm going to protect him. I'll do whatever it takes. SpaceX headquarters buzzed with activity as Rachel Donovan entered the building the next morning. The crispness of the early hours didn't do much to shake the unease settling in her stomach. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous night, and the growing realization that the Mars mission had become a battleground for something far more dangerous than the dream of interplanetary colonization. There was a conspiracy brewing, and Rachel was now deeply tangled in it. The moment she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. It was another message from Zara Chun. Meet me in the conference room in 10. We need to talk about the plan. Rachel exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the phone. The plan? What plan? How many plans were there now? And who could she trust? She couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing in on her. As much as she had worked tirelessly for this mission, now, everything was up for grabs. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. By the time the elevator reached the top floor, Rachel had her resolve firmly in place. Whatever was going on, whatever Gray and his shadowy partners were trying to pull off, she couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not with her brother Finn possibly being dragged into this web. Not when the future of humanity was on the line. The conference room door was slightly ajar. Rachel pushed it open and entered. Trick Davis, the flight director, and Percy Williams, the head of security, were already seated at the table, looking unusually tense. As usual, Trick was cool and composed, but Rachel could tell his mind was elsewhere, just like the rest of them. Percy, the normally quiet and stoic head of security, was visibly on edge. His eyes flicked to Rachel as she entered, but he didn't say anything. Zara, as always, was calm, her expression guarded but determined. She met Rachel's gaze and nodded, signaling her to take a seat. "All right," Zara began, her voice firm but strained. "We're all here. We need to discuss how we're going to handle this. The situation is far more complicated than we initially thought." Rachel sat down, her gaze moving between her colleagues. "You mean the weaponization of a Mars mission?" Zara exchanged a brief glance with Trick and Percy before responding. "Yes, that's part of it. But we've also uncovered something else, something even more troubling." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. "The security systems are compromised. We believe someone inside SpaceX has been working with Gray, or worse, has been feeding him information." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "You mean someone here? A mole?" Trick nodded gravely. "Yes, we've been looking into the access logs. There are patterns of unauthorized entries in his sensitive areas, particularly around the time Elon met with Gray. The culprit has been covering their tracks well, but we're beginning to connect the dots." Percy's usually calm demeanor had given way to visible concern. "And it gets worse. We've identified that certain systems, specifically in the life support module, are being tampered with remotely. These modifications aren't just about efficiency. They're designed to make the system untraceable to outside observers. If Gray's people want to weaponize the Mars habitat, they'll have a backdoor to control it at will." Rachel felt a cold chill slide down her spine. "How long have these changes been happening?" Trick leaned forward. "We believe it's been going on for a few weeks now. Whoever is behind this has been subtly altering the core mission parameters, just enough to create a serious problem when it's time to launch. They're setting us up to fail, or worse, to sabotage the mission without anyone noticing." Rachel's mind raced. She had spent countless hours working on the life support systems, carefully calibrating every aspect to ensure the safety of future Mars colonists. To think that someone had been quietly altering that work was terrifying. "What can we do about it?" Rachel asked, her voice tight with frustration. Zara stood and moved to the whiteboard at the side of the room. She began jotting down key points. "First, we need to verify every single change made to the systems. That's the easy part. We can run simulations to track down anomalies. But we need to find the source of this breach. We have to identify who's been feeding Gray the information and why. If we don't, we'll never be able to stop him." Percy's voice was low and filled with urgency. "We also need to consider the safety of everyone here. Our families, our colleagues. If Gray is involved with outside forces, we could be looking at a coordinated effort to undermine SpaceX from within. Whoever is working with him knows exactly what they're doing." Rachel glanced at Trick, who was unusually silent. His mind was obviously working through multiple angles. He was a tactical thinker, and she knew his mind would be running through every possible scenario. But this wasn't just about technical failures anymore. It was about survival. Trick finally spoke up. "We have to assume Gray is aware of our suspicions by now. He's been monitoring everything closely. We'll need to keep up the illusion that we're complying, but in the background, we need to work quickly to neutralize the threat." Zara turned back to the group. "The clock is ticking. We can't afford to wait. We'll need to divide and conquer. Rachel, I want you to focus on the life support systems. We need to run tests and figure out exactly what's been altered. I'll get in touch with our external partners, anyone we can trust, to start looking into Gray's connections." Rachel nodded, determination setting in. "Got it. What about Finn?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Zara's expression softened, but she didn't flinch. "We can't involve him yet. He's too close to everything. If he's already compromised, bringing him into this could jeopardize everything." Rachel clenched her jaw. It wasn't easy to accept, but Zara was right. Finn was too important to risk, too vulnerable. And if Gray had targeted him, using him as leverage, she couldn't afford to drag him further into this web of lies and deception. "Not yet." Percy stood up, his face hardening as he spoke. "We also need to lock down the security systems. If someone inside SpaceX is feeding Gray information, they've been using backdoors to avoid detection. I'll have my team start an immediate sweep of the building and start monitoring any unusual activity." Zara nodded. "Good. Trick, you and I will focus on monitoring Gray's activities and preparing our public response if things escalate. We need to make sure our investors don't catch wind of any of this." Rachel's thoughts were swirling. It was clear now. They were in a race against time, against an enemy that had already infiltrated their ranks. But there was still so much they didn't know. How far had Gray infiltrated the company? Who could they trust? And what was Gray's real endgame? "Let's get to work," Zara said, her voice determined. "We have a mission to save, and we're not going to let it fall into the wrong hands." The clock was ticking down. Rachel sat at her workstation in the engineering wing, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she worked through the life support system's latest simulations. The data was troubling, to say the least. The modifications made to the systems were subtle but significant. The oxygen regeneration unit had been altered to nearly triple its capacity. The water reclamation system had been redesigned completely. These weren't mistakes. These were purposeful changes, designed to create instability under the guise of improvements. Her heart sank as she reviewed the figures. This wasn't just an engineering issue anymore. This was a calculated effort to sabotage the Mars mission from within. And someone at SpaceX was aiding Gray in making these changes. But who and why? She ran the simulations again, checking for any discrepancies. The data was consistent, each calculation pointing to the same thing. The changes weren't intended to enhance the system. They were intended to create failure points. The kind of failure that wouldn't be noticed until the systems were already operational, and by then, it would be too late. Whoever had made these alterations knew exactly how to hide them in plain sight. As Rachel mulled over the data, her mind kept returning to the person who had been at the heart of the mission from the beginning, Elon Musk. What was his role in all of this? Had he been compromised too? She had been wrestling with that question ever since her late-night discovery in the R&D lab, when she overheard Elon speaking with Gray. Could Elon Musk, the visionary who had turned SpaceX into a global force, really be a pawn in this larger game? She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the immediate task at hand. She had to find out how these changes had been implemented. And fast. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Trick Davis, meeting in 30. "Bring everything you've got." Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. Trick didn't call meetings unless something critical had come up. She stood up quickly, grabbing her tablet and her notes, and headed out the door. When she arrived at the conference room, Trick, Zara, and Percy Williams were already there. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was on edge, and Rachel could sense the urgency in their movements. Zara turned to her as she walked in. "You got the report?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Rachel nodded. "The life support systems have been compromised. Someone altered the oxygen and water systems, making them dangerously inefficient. But the changes are so subtle, it would take months to detect the failure points unless you know exactly what to look for." Percy's eyes narrowed. "We've got a mole," he said grimly. "Someone inside SpaceX is feeding Gray information. They've been using backdoors to bypass the security protocols. That's how they've been making these changes without raising suspicion." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Do we know who it is?" Trick sighed and rubbed his face. "Not yet, but we're getting closer. I've been reviewing security footage from the past few weeks. There are a few employees who were in restricted areas at odd hours. We're tracing their access logs now," Zara added. "We also have some external sources we've been able to contact. We're going to start tracking Gray's movements more closely. But this is bigger than just one mole inside SpaceX. Gray's operation seems global. He's got ties to powerful people, private military contractors, and possibly even certain government entities. The stakes are much higher than we originally thought." Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. "So we're not just fighting an internal threat. We're up against something much larger." Trick nodded. "Exactly. This isn't just about the Mars mission anymore. This is about controlling space. Whoever controls the resources in space controls Earth's future. That's what Gray and his partners want." Rachel's mind raced. She had known the stakes were high, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. A war for the future of humanity, fought not with weapons on Earth, but with the power to control Mars and the space surrounding it. Percy, ever the realist, crossed his arms. "And that's why we need to act quickly. If Gray gets what he wants, it won't just be SpaceX that suffers. The entire space industry will be manipulated for their agenda. We can't let that happen." Zara's eyes were focused, calculating. "Our next steps are clear. We need to isolate the source of the breach. Rachel, you'll continue working on the life support systems and look for any other signs of tampering. Percy, I need you to lock down the security systems. We can't afford another breach. Trick, you'll continue reviewing the access logs and coordinate with external sources to track Gray's movements. I'll be reaching out to trusted contacts to get more intel." Rachel felt the weight of their plans settle over her. "What about Elon?" she asked. "Do we bring him into this?" Zara shook her head. "Not yet. He's under enough pressure as it is. And honestly, we don't know if he's part of the problem or if he's just been manipulated. We need to handle this carefully." Rachel hesitated. Something still didn't sit right with her about Elon's sudden change in behavior. She had seen the way he looked the night before, the defeated man who had confessed. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Was it truly doubt, or was it part of a larger strategy to mislead everyone, to buy time while Gray's forces closed in on them? Zara noticed the uncertainty in her expression and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Rachel, I know this isn't easy, but we have to stay focused. We're the ones who can fix this. We just have to stay one step ahead." Rachel nodded, but her thoughts were already drifting back to the conversation she had overheard in the R&D lab. Elon had been involved with Gray. Of that, she was sure. The only question now was whether he was being forced to cooperate or if he had a deeper role in this conspiracy than anyone realized. As she left the meeting, Rachel's mind was in turmoil. She had a mission to complete, but the personal cost of this battle was becoming clear. The people she worked with, her friends, her colleagues, were all caught in the crossfire. And as much as she wanted to believe that everything would work out, she knew that there was no easy path forward. The weight of the secret she had discovered was heavy on her shoulders. She had to act fast. There was no time to waste. The next few days felt like a blur for Rachel Donovan. The pressure of the situation seemed to bear down on her with every passing hour, and she was beginning to feel the weight of every decision, every move she made. She had spent long hours in the lab, working through the life support system's simulations and testing for any additional sabotage. She had found more anomalies, subtle changes that had been made to the atmospheric processors, designed to control oxygen levels in ways that were far too volatile for long-term habitation. It was as if someone was trying to create a catastrophic failure, but in such a way that it wouldn't be obvious until it was too late. Rachel had also been digging into the security breach. The team was right to suspect a mole. Her access to the logs revealed patterns that were almost too perfect to be random. There were certain employees who had been accessing restricted areas during the hours when the life support systems had been altered. They weren't just any engineers. They were some of the most trusted people in SpaceX. Rachel had worked with them directly on several projects. The idea that one of them might be behind this, working with Gray, was a gut punch she wasn't sure she could recover from. Despite the mounting pressure, there was a strange sense of urgency in the air. The team had pushed forward with their plan to uncover the mole, secure the systems, and stop Gray from turning their work into a weapon. But as they worked in silence, they all knew they were up against something bigger than just a sabotage mission. They were fighting for the future of humanity, humanity's very existence on Mars, and maybe even on Earth. Rachel was in the lab late one night, testing a new algorithm to analyze the life support system's data logs, when her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from Trick Davis. "We got a lead. Meet me in the security office in 10. Her pulse quickened. This was it. This was the break they'd been waiting for. She grabbed her tablet and rushed to the elevator, her heart pounding in her chest. As she walked through the hallways, she couldn't help but feel that something was shifting. She wasn't sure what yet, but everything felt different now. There was a finality to the mission that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just solving technical problems. She was fighting against something far more sinister. When she reached the security office, Trick and Percy Williams were already there. Trick looked up as she entered, his eyes hard with determination. Percy stood by a computer terminal, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard as he reviewed the latest data. "Rachel," Trick said, his voice low but urgent. "We found our mole." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Who is it?" Trick pointed to the screen. It was a list of names, accompanied by access logs and timestamps. The name at the top of the list made Rachel's blood run cold. Elena Pierce. Elena had been with SpaceX since its early days. She was a senior engineer, well-respected, and one of the original members of the Mars team. Rachel had worked with her countless times, collaborating on everything from the Mars habitat's basic infrastructure to its life support systems. Elena had always seemed reliable, focused, and committed to the mission. But now, Rachel saw her name at the top of the list, and everything she thought she knew was thrown into question. Trick continued, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "Elena has been accessing restricted areas of the building, specifically the life support systems and the propulsion units. She's been working late into the night, making subtle changes to the systems. It matches the timeline of when we started seeing the irregularities." Rachel's hands shook as she read through the data. But why? Why would she do this? Percy stood up and turned to face her, his expression grim. "That's the part we still don't understand. But it's clear she's been working with Gray, or at least with someone who has the same agenda. She's been feeding them information, and she's been making these alterations to the systems in a way that's impossible to detect until it's too late." Rachel felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had trusted Elena. She had trusted her to help create a sustainable environment for humanity's future. And now it seemed that Elena had been part of the very force trying to destroy that future. "There's more," Trick added. "We've traced her communications. There's a message she sent 2 days ago that's been flagged. It's encrypted, but we're working on decrypting it. If we can get access to it, we'll know for sure if she's working with Gray." Rachel stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Elena, the woman I trusted. A mole. The thought was almost too much to process. She had worked side by side with Elena, trusted her expertise, admired her dedication. But now everything had changed. "What do we do now?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she was asking for herself or for the entire team. The discovery of the mole felt like a crushing blow. Trick's expression was hard. "We can't confront her directly. If she's working with Gray, she'll be dangerous. But we can't let her keep sabotaging the mission. We need to isolate her and figure out what she's really up to. Percy, I need you to keep a close eye on her. Don't let her know we're on to her. Rachel, I need you to stay focused on the systems. We can't afford any more delays. Rachel nodded, trying to push her feelings aside. They had a job to do. They had to stop Gray and his operatives, and they couldn't afford to let their emotions cloud their judgment. But deep down, she knew this was personal. Elena's betrayal cut deep, and she wasn't sure how she could ever trust anyone again. As the meeting came to an end, Trick turned to Rachel. Stay sharp. If Elena's been compromised, we need to assume everyone is. There's no room for error anymore. Do you understand? Rachel nodded. I understand. But as she left the security office, the weight of the situation was unbearable. She couldn't stop thinking about Elena, about how the woman she had worked so closely with had turned out to be the very thing she feared the most. A traitor, and not just any traitor. One who had been working against them from the inside, planting the seeds for the mission's destruction. The closer Rachel got to the heart of the conspiracy, the more it felt like she was being pulled into a web of lies with no way out. She had been hoping for clarity, for an easy solution. But now she realized that there was no way to undo what had been done. The mission was compromised, and the battle for humanity's future was far from over. As Rachel sat down in front of her console, ready to continue her work, a thought crossed her mind that made her blood run cold. What if Gray was only the beginning? What if the real danger was already here, in SpaceX, in the people she trusted the most? Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her since discovering Elena's betrayal. As the hours passed, she found it harder and harder to focus on the work she had been assigned. Every time she looked at the data, every time she ran a test or simulated a scenario, she couldn't help but see Elena's face in her mind. How could someone she had trusted, someone who had been part of the team from the beginning, turn out to be the very thing they feared most? Rachel had spent so many sleepless nights working side by side with Elena, discussing technical problems, brainstorming solutions for the Mars mission. Elena had always been sharp, focused, and dedicated. She had been a pillar of the team, someone who would be there to solve any crisis, no matter how complex. Now, Rachel couldn't even look at the work Elena had done without feeling sick to her stomach. It was as though everything she had believed in was slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. But there was no time to dwell on her personal feelings. SpaceX was in the fight of its life, and she had a job to do. The mission was at risk, the sabotage was still ongoing, and Elena was just the tip of the iceberg. Gray's operation was massive, far more expansive than they had originally thought. They were dealing with more than just one mole inside the company. If Elena had been compromised, who else had been? And how deep did Gray's influence go? Rachel sat in her office, staring at the screen in front of her. The data from the life support systems was still troubling, showing signs of stress that could lead to catastrophic failure during the Mars mission. There were still so many variables to account for, so many unknowns. But as she dug deeper into the logs, she noticed something strange, a pattern, almost like a message embedded in the system. It wasn't a technical anomaly, but a deliberate insertion. It was as though someone was leaving subtle clues, guiding them toward a conclusion. Her heart began to race. Was this a trap? Had Gray planted this, knowing they would catch on? Or was this something else, a way for someone on the inside to send a warning? Before she could investigate further, her phone buzzed. It was Trick Davis. We have a problem. Meet me in the R&D lab in 20 minutes. Rachel stood up immediately, her heart sinking. She knew this wasn't going to be good news. The last time she'd heard from Trick, they'd uncovered Elena's betrayal, but they hadn't yet fully processed what it meant. What other surprises did Gray have in store for them? When Rachel arrived at the R&D lab, Trick was already there, his face grim. Percy Williams stood beside him, his expression hard. The lab was filled with engineers and security personnel, all working quietly, but the tension in the room was palpable. Rachel, Trick said, his voice low, you need to see this. He led her to a computer terminal, where a series of encrypted files were displayed on the screen. Rachel felt her stomach churn as she recognized the contents. These weren't just technical files, they were personnel records. Names, addresses, schedules, and, most troubling of all, family information. Percy turned to her. We've been tracking the mole, But we found something worse. Gray isn't just targeting SpaceX employees. He's been collecting intel on our families. The families of everyone in this room. And it looks like he's been using that information to leverage control. Rachel's mind spun. How could he know that much? I thought we had security, she said, her voice tight with anger. How could he get access to this? Percy's expression hardened. We've been compromised, not just by one mole, but by an entire network. We're dealing with a highly sophisticated operation, and it's been in place for months. Rachel's eyes widened. So Gray has been gathering intel on us for months? On our families? This goes beyond just sabotaging the mission. Trick nodded, his face dark. Exactly. It's not just about the Mars mission anymore. This is about control. Gray's network isn't limited to SpaceX. He's been working with external players, military, intelligence agencies, and private contractors. His goal is to manipulate the space industry from the inside. Rachel felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The entire company, the entire mission was at risk. But it wasn't just the mission now. It was their families, their lives, and their future. Gray had made it personal. She felt a cold chill in her bones as she realized what this meant. Gray wasn't just trying to sabotage SpaceX. He was trying to destroy everything they had built, everything they had worked for. And it was all tied to the people they loved. Do we know who else is involved? Rachel asked, her voice shaking. Trick's face tightened. We have some leads, but it's clear now, this is bigger than just SpaceX. Gray has infiltrated multiple organizations, and he's got people in high places. We got to assume that anyone could be compromised. Rachel nodded slowly. She knew what they had to do now. They had to neutralize the threat, take control of the mission, and protect their families. But it wasn't going to be easy. Gray's network was vast, and the people who worked with him were ruthless. We need to act fast, she said, determination creeping into her voice. If we're going to stop Gray, we need to isolate him. We need to find out who he's working with and shut down the mole network. Percy's eyes flashed with resolve, and we need to make sure our families are safe. If Gray's using them as leverage, we need to take them out of the equation before they become targets. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Agreed, but we can't let anyone else know what's happening. We can't afford to alert Gray to our plans. Zara's voice echoed through her thoughts. Stay sharp. Trust no one. But the truth was, Rachel didn't know who to trust anymore. They had already lost Elena. How many others were working for Gray? And how could they fight an enemy who knew them so well? Trick looked at Rachel with a grim expression. We've got a few hours to figure this out before things get worse. Let's make them count. The days that followed felt like an endless blur of decisions, preparations, and tense moments. Rachel Donovan had spent countless hours in the engineering wing, running simulations, testing systems, and hunting for any signs of further sabotage. But no matter how many layers she peeled back, the threat from within SpaceX and Gray's external network seemed to multiply. Each revelation felt like a new blow, a fresh reminder that they were fighting a war on multiple fronts. But through it all, Rachel couldn't afford to be distracted. They were running out of time. Every passing minute brought them closer to the Mars mission launch. And every passing day, Gray's influence on the mission seemed more and more profound. If they didn't act soon, their entire work would be turned into a weaponized nightmare. A nightmare that could destroy the very future they had fought for. The plan was in motion. They would confront Gray and his network head-on, but they couldn't afford to tip him off. Not yet. First, they had to gather more information, secure their families, and isolate the mole network. It was a high-stakes game, and every decision had to be calculated. Any misstep could cost them everything. Rachel sat at her desk in the dimly lit lab, her eyes glued to the data on the screen in front of her. She was combing through the last set of simulation results, looking for any discrepancies in the life support systems. Anything that could suggest a backdoor had been left open, a subtle flaw that Gray's operatives could exploit. So far, everything seemed to check out, but the feeling in her gut told her that they weren't out of the woods yet. Gray was clever, and if he was working from the inside, then there was no telling how deep his reach had gone. The sound of footsteps broke her concentration. She turned to see Trick Davis and Zara Chun enter the room. Trick's face was as hard as stone, and Zara's expression was tight with urgency. "We've got a problem," Trick said, his voice low and controlled. "Gray's people are moving faster than we thought. They've already set up a security breach in the launch system." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Zara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "It's bad. We've traced communications that show Gray's operatives are already preparing to override the mission's final parameters. They're targeting the rocket's launch sequence." Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline. "How much time do we have?" Trick ran a hand through his hair. "At most, a few hours. We need to move quickly. If we don't disable the override protocols before launch, Gray could hijack the mission. And if he gets control of the launch, he'll have the means to deploy the weaponized Mars habitat before we can stop him." Rachel's mind raced. The mission was about to launch, and if Gray could take control of the rocket, it would be catastrophic. But there was no time to waste on second-guessing. They had to act, and they had to act fast. "Where are we at with them all?" Rachel asked, trying to steady herself. She had to remain calm. They had no room for panic. Zara's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've isolated Elena Pierce. She's been working with Gray's people, feeding them information about the mission systems. But we haven't been able to confront her yet. If we do, she'll alert Gray, and we'll lose our chance to stop him." Rachel stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision was heavy. "Then we have no choice but to go for the launch override. We disable Gray's access to the rocket, and we do it now." Zara nodded. "We'll need to act on multiple fronts. Trick and I will head to the launch control room and initiate the override sequence. Percy, I need you to coordinate with security. Make sure Elena doesn't make a move while we're dealing with this." Percy's expression was resolute. "Understood. I'll handle the perimeter. Nobody gets in or out until we're done." Rachel nodded and turned back to the life support systems, her mind already working through the steps. They could do this. They had to. With a final glance at her colleagues, she spoke again. "Let's make sure this mission is safe. For all of us, no matter what it takes." The next few hours passed in a haze of adrenaline and uncertainty. Trick, Zara, and Percy moved quickly, coordinating their efforts with precision. Rachel stayed in the lab, monitoring the systems and preparing to intervene if necessary. She was in constant communication with Trick, walking him through the final steps of locking out Gray's override protocols. Every keystroke, every command felt like it could be the last chance they had to stop the impending disaster. As the countdown clock ticked down to the final moments before the launch, Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing on her. They were this close, but they were also dangerously close to failing. Finally, Trick's voice came through on the secure comms channel. "It's done. The override sequence is locked in. We've disabled Gray's access to the launch system." Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Are you sure? Is it locked down for good?" "Locked and secured. You won't be able to touch it now," Trick confirmed. "It's in your hands now. Make sure that mission goes off without a hitch." Rachel turned back to the life support systems, typing in the final commands to double-check everything. The rocket was on its way, and they had to make sure the habitat systems were fully operational. There was no margin for error. As the launch window approached, Rachel's hands were steady, her mind laser-focused. She watched as the rocket engines began their preliminary checks. The massive structure outside the window shuddered as it came to life, ready for its journey to Mars. And then the final countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket ignited, rising slowly from the launch pad. A massive cheer erupted from the control room as the vessel ascended into the sky, breaking free from the grip of Earth's atmosphere. It was happening. It was real. Rachel watched the rocket ascend, her heart swelling with pride and relief. For a moment, the world felt like it had shifted back into place. The mission was secure. Gray had been thwarted. The Mars mission, humanity's first true step toward the stars, was on its way. But even as the rocket soared, Rachel knew this was just the beginning. The battle wasn't over. Gray and his operatives would be back. There were still pieces to uncover, still people to expose, and still a future to fight for. As Rachel watched the rocket disappear into the distance, she made a silent vow to herself and to the mission. This fight is far from over, but we've won this round.